What's up, Ryan? And why is the
Hey,
music
Jeff.
still playing? Hold on. Do you still hear
I
the
can't
music?
hear it on my side. So
That's cool.
It's funny. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome though. But hey, it's great to be back.
I'll just mute that. There we go. Hopefully nobody else can hear that now. I don't know why it's still playing though. Oh, interesting. Interesting.
It's always, there's always something new that's happening with technology. I always like when we're trying to work this out. It's like how anyone who's watching the show the last couple episodes, you'll notice that even my setup keeps changing. Where it's like, oh, okay, cool. I can eliminate like echoes if I have the audio coming into my ear pods. And, the type of mic that I'm using, the type of camera that I'm going to use, like figuring out these lights. So there's a little bit of Kessel chat in progress. That's it's great to have everybody joining us every week as we sharpen that stick. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm sorry, while you were doing the intro there, I was putting my smile on because I was hearing myself and you talking delayed, and I realized I actually had YouTube open into my browser, and I'm like checking my software here. I'm like, why am I hearing myself? I finally realized YouTube was opening, so the delay was playing. Oh my gosh. I did get most all the other technology figured out. I don't know what happened last week. Like half my eCam settings went away. Anyway, you had this like profound intro that is fantastic, and thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. No worries.
It's so cool. So I put it up on the there. Where is it? Point up that way, right above Ryan. I put that title up there for everyone watching. And this was kind of an interesting idea for us to pick off tonight. But what we're going to try to do is part of the live stream as we got some new content and things coming your way, which is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be sort of one of these. We have a couple of these like mini series sort of ideas rolling around, and the idea here is that the hero's journey. So Joseph Campbell and the whole concept. Twitter. Ryan put it out on Twitter just a little bit ago. A couple different examples of this you can go research and just understand a bit more about it. But the idea is to each of us pick a character in Star Wars we either have the hero's journey for, but like we know where their beginning is and how their character kind of is ended at this point, or somebody that hasn't had an end yet that we want to see expanded upon, whatever that is. This will be one of like a few different miniseries that we run periodically throughout the live stream. And then the other kind of piece of good information is, I think, so long as it all works out, next week we should have our first guest on the show.
Oh, right on.
So we're going to have, if it all works out, Jonah Gardner is going to join us. We're going to talk a lot about mythos and mythology and how that inspired and things like Kurosawa and all that type of stuff that inspired Star Wars and why all those, like this mythology background is like so important for what Star Wars actually is and why these stories resonate. And then I didn't tell you, Ryan, but I actually think I have a line on another guest for a few more weeks out somebody else. So I'll message you offline, but we might have some more guests. So it's, the Kessel Chat's just growing. It's awesome.
Hey, this is awesome. And I gotta say this. I had a chance to talk with Joanna about the show, and then we started talking about mythology, and we started to in the 5-minute chat became a 10-minute chat, became a 15-minute chat, and I said to Joanna exactly what often you and I say before this show, which is, "Oh no, we're doing the show right now." So it's great. I'm like crazy excited to have Joanna on the show and being able to leverage her great background on mythology, especially as we tackle, like, we start to get into the weeds in this story. Like sometimes we're talking about the surface stuff, or sometimes we're talking about politics in Star Wars. This is going to be great. It's really like the foundational elements about kind of why these stories resonate with us. You know, you were talking about that word resonating, like why we find these stories and other stories, whether it's Star Wars or The Matrix or the Avatar, The Last Airbender. Why do these stories really connect with us? Why does someone like Rey really have us connect with her story? And it's all because of these kind of like timeless elements that are told as part of stories all over the world from, you know, ages long ago. So it's so great for us to be able to do this. And Jeff, like, kudos to you, man. I'm really glad that this bubbled up on the list for us to kind of knock out.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really, we started tracking all these different topics we kind of want to go after, and there's just a lot of them. And this one I thought might be a really interesting one to get ourselves into, to kind of switch it up a little bit from the normal, because we focus so much on stories and the storytelling side of Star Wars. There's just a bunch of other shows out there that do a great job of like movie reviews and character breakdowns and things like that. You know, really getting into the weeds of like the details of a character, where they've appeared, how they've appeared, and all that. And that's fantastic. They put out so much, all these other channels put out, YouTube or podcasts, what have you, just put out so much great content that this show is just, it feels so much more interesting for the two of us to talk about, hopefully for the audience too, about how these stories interact, or people interact with these stories. And you mentioned politics. I think things, social and human dynamics like politics, amongst a variety of other things, are what make, again, in addition to what you said, make these stories so interesting for people, because it's not that we like politics or necessarily enjoy the like political battles that we see in our countries. What it is that the whole idea of human politics, when you see those in a story, you can connect with it because you understand it. You have a basis for what's happening, and that makes it again, the word resonate, makes it resonate with you, so that you feel more connected to that story and you want to continue with it. It's like, I think you said it in the pre-show that good stories have not just truth to them, but they have the author's truth. The author is telling their truth in the story. All the characters can be totally fictional. Neil Gaiman actually said that on his masterclass I finished recently, where he said exactly that, literally what you said. If you have to put your own truth into the story, you have to. If you don't, your reader will know that you are not doing that, and they will not want to read your content. Everything about it can be completely fictional, but it's got to be your truth as best as you can possibly tell it, and that makes those books the real page turns. You have to follow that story. You want to know what's going to happen next, and you keep turning that page to find out that next thing, and then the thing after that, etc.
Oh, I completely agree. And I you know, there's an old phrase, all art is political, and that's because you have to make choices. And Star Wars has elements that are mythological that go all the way back to ancient Greece, if not before that. It's stories that were told in Native American communities, isolated from other parts of the world. I mean, these are stories and elements of stories that are timeless across all cultures, and yet they are not written in a vacuum. Star Wars is written at a time during the Vietnam War, written at a time where the Cold War is active in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can even see episode one as an extension of those like kind of lackadaisical, kind of easy years of the late 90s, where I would say that most of the politics of the late 90s were consumed with things like what would be the outlying taxation of the taxation of outlying trade routes, where we were maybe more consumed with things like taxes and maybe missing bigger things that
Mm-hmm.
then kind of ultimately exposed themselves as we got into the early 2000s. All of these stories are both epic and old in their origin, but very reflective of their times. And I think that's what makes really great stories is they have hooks to today, but they have their roots in the past. So
It's
yeah.
it is really an interesting thing that you just said that, because it got me thinking that I don't, there's that sort of adage of like, if you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I mean, it's obviously, in my opinion, it's a lot more nuanced than that. It's not just that simple, but understanding, when I hear politics, is probably an easy way to think about, an easy one to think about, because it's so polarizing, so black and white for many people,
Yeah.
nationally, locally.
Yeah.
I mean, the politics is nuanced no matter what, but the way we hear it tends to be very, it's this or that. It's not how it actually is, but it's how it's phrased in a lot of cases. And I was having a
Mhm.
conversation with somebody not too long ago about it wasn't politics, but about policy based thing. I think it was recycling,
Mhm.
and we had this long conversation. I won't bore anybody here with it, but what we got to is, I kept trying to tell this person this history of how we got to a place, and the person kept saying, "That's whatever. What are we going to do to solve it?" And I'm like, and I was struggling, because I'm like, in my opinion, we need to understand how we got to the place that we're in now to figure out what we
Yep.
should do to solve it, because the reasons we got here are the core part of the, like, all the core pieces of this nuanced set of problems. So it's not just one thing that we go change and now we're good. It's a lot of things. And I think what you said about, art mimicking life and showing us our history, this is actually a really good place. And Star Wars is probably a good way to see this, is to read a lot of Star Wars books as if, these stories are retelling history, sort of like your parables in Christian religions and other ancient religions, where they use parables or stories to convey complex information to somebody who may not understand. And that's exactly
Oh
what
yeah.
stories are great at doing. If we can read these things and take away from them, like it, if we sat there, like you just said, the trade routes and leading to Palpatine, you tell like a politician that, for example, like, what are you talking about? Why would I? It's like, that's not the point. The point is, these patterns have reoccurred throughout history many, many times over. And if we can understand that, we can start to sit and look at our present and say, is something happening here that's masking other things that could turn into a larger issue for us down the line, that we're just not looking at because it's too hard to look at. It takes too much time. It's the small thing we don't really know. Probably.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it could
Mhm.
inform the way that we as a society look at the problems that are in front of us, if we could just slow down a little bit. And I mean, be honest, read a little more fiction, read a little bit more of these stories that seem, there's such a, I've heard, kind of a dichotomy in people's minds between, like, well, nonfiction's where you go to learn and fiction's where you go to be entertained. Like, yeah, but doesn't, you're making it sound like it's one or the other. Like, they're not mutually exclusive. You can be both. You can learn and be entertained by both forms of content. Um, to say that nonfiction is like, I read a math book, or I read, a biography or autobiography. Yes, you learn something. Fiction is the same way. You just have to see it. I mean, the Forever War, the book, The Forever War, is a fantastic example of that. It's a complete allegory of the Vietnam War. You read it, it tells you exactly what all the problems were of the Vietnam War, but in a complete fantasy. Sci-fi,
Yeah.
time warping, all this type of stuff. But it is literally a 100% allegory of the Vietnam conflict. That's a fiction
No.
novel, but you can learn so much from that about how did this happen and how did our mindsets get modified based off of what was going on in the world around us.
Yeah, I mean, art, truth, beauty, they're all in the eye of the beholder. So it's like, I would all of them possess a unique thing that you can kind of be taught by. But yeah, I'm gonna fish into because everybody knows I also will pull in Star Trek things. I love to mix my wars and my Trek. But a star I'm gonna bring up two Star Trek episode titles. One of them is Past is Prologue from Deep Space Nine, or actually, I believe that episode's Past Prologue, but Past is Prologue. It's the things that lead us into where we're going, and so it's important to know of that. And also a recent one, which is Context is for Kings. It's wildly important to not just understand kind of how things got to where it is, but then to also see them within the context of what they are written about. And this goes back to all of those points. It's like we can really grab a lot of great lessons from the past in all of these things, whether it's a tale that's told in the Bible. Or it's about a farm boy who's on a dirt planet a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or in another way, it's the old fairy tale line of in a kingdom far away, it's one of these things where we can you can really have those stories kind of exist because they're timeless. They're boundless, especially in science fiction, and you can just kind of mirror them to a lot of these really great mythological stories that we have. And yeah, like there's always going to be an Emperor Palpatine in a lot of these stories. You're going to have your artists being able to bring things up that are like your One Ring or your Sauron. You're going to have the fires of industry burning the earth, as Tolkien would say. And even though Tolkien will constantly say, "I was writing about hobbits," he is either unknowingly or unintentionally, or even maybe unconsciously writing about his journey in World War I. And what that effect is. I mean, you learn just as much about the kings of Rohan and Arnor and Gondor in the Lord of the Rings as you do the heroes and the people that make
Mhm.
heroes in World War I. So yeah, it's great because those stories are subtext that run through some of the great things that we all love, and they are baked into Star Wars.
Yeah,
So that's why I love this topic. I love being able to talk about the hero journey tonight, and I hope that all of you are just as excited and kind of getting ready to get into the minutia. So
absolutely.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And you clearly, for everyone watching, we love to bury the lead. So now that we're like
Oh,
17 minutes in, now we're going to get to the meat of the topic for tonight. And Ryan is going to kick us off with his first pick for the night.
yes. Okay, so first I just want to set the stage for anybody who's kind of watching and wondering like what is the hero's journey. So the hero's journey is kind of is one of these like what are considered now a timeless element of storytelling. And you see this in Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces in the Monomyth. You see it in a lot of storytelling right now. Honestly, when most people talk about stories, they talk about like a three-act play where you have your introduction and rising action, you get to your climax, then you get to your resolution. And so story structures typically go, and I don't think this is going to be reflected properly here, but it's like goes up, down, climax, and then your kind of falling action to your resolution and your close. And one of the big concepts though that is in that is the hero's journey, and this is actually a story that's of course bigger than Star Wars. You see it in great and epic tales from ancient Greece. You hear it in tales that you'll even see in Christian religion and Christian mythology. You'll see it in Eastern cultures, Western cultures, Native American cultures who tell very similar stories, and they often involve a person going on a journey. And these are probably the way to summarize it the best. It's typically about a single individual that is sent on a talisman that helps them on that journey, going into a world that is unknown, experiencing a bit of sacrifice and chaos, but then coming out from that journey stronger, better, and in a better position to be able to affect change on their world or their community that they haven't been able to achieve, and that they themselves are irrevocably changed. It is seriously like a story that you see repeated over and over and over again, whether it's going to be Luke Skywalker in A New Hope or even Optimus Prime in Transformers. It is everywhere. Aang is going through this story in Avatar: The Last Airbender. So the hero that I wanted to pick, and I have a lot. I mean, I could make a good case across so many heroes' journeys. I even thought like, oh, I should go like crazy deep and do like R4D5, or like really like do like I'm gonna do a droid. And I thought about heroes that I love that are in a part of that hero's journey that have done so many great things, like Finn. Finn is one of my favorite characters in the Star Wars saga. I thought about Bodhi and Jyn Erso from Rogue One, both of whom have a bit of flawed heroes' journeys, but are still great. I even thought about tragic heroes, which I hope we get into in our next episode, with people like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who's a tragic hero just as much as Anakin is. But I decided to go a little bit different. Luke's obviously very on the nose, and I wanted to pick someone who's recent that has a great story, and that is Din Djarin, the Mandalorian. The Mandalorian, to me, is an amazing hero's journey. Often when you meet the hero, just like when you meet Din Djarin or when you meet Luke Skywalker, they're living their normal day-to-day life. You know, Luke in Star Wars, he's just trying to get some power converters at Tashi Station, and he's a dreamer. And Din Djarin, when you meet him, he is nameless. He is the man with no name. He has no care in the world. He's very like classic kind of hero setup and what you would find in like Eastern cinema, what you would find in the Old West, which is based on a lot of like Kurosawa films, all of the spaghetti westerns, The Man with No Name. That is Din Djarin. You meet him and he's just who he is. You could even say he might even be a bit of an anti-hero. But the thing that happens is that in that hero's journey, or what I posted on Twitter about the story circle, there is something that Din Djarin wants, and it's something bigger than what he has right now, and it's more than just getting credits. It's more than just making money. It's resolving an issue of the past. And often that is what the hero's doing. And you could see this in Avatar. You could see it in Moana, which is the hero is being placed on a journey to right a wrong that is a sickness, that is a wound, and so that, or a trauma, which Din Djarin has experienced, and so then his story changes the minute that trauma becomes real in seeing a youngling and seeing the child inside of a bounty, inside of an egg that of course is the bounty that he should be pursuing. And he makes multiple decisions that counter the creed of his job to stay true to a personal creed. And that's where you have a character that's making choices. They have to leave their order and go into chaos. Just like how Luke's got to leave the farm and go to a hive of scum and villainy and meet people like Han Solo and Chewbacca. And Din Djarin has to leave the covert, has to put his existing family at risk, just like Luke has essentially done as well. He gets a talisman, which is this Beskar outfit to help him on his journey. That talisman appears in so many different versions of the stories. Luke gets a lightsaber in the Never-Ending Story. Atreyu gets Orin to help him on his journey. And often it's bestowed as this very ancient thing, this right of thing, this almost a birthright. And Din Djarin is even more than connected to all of the Mandalorians that came before them, before him, and is able to wear that Beskar, and then has to go through this world of chaos and even experience sacrifice, personal sacrifice, injuries, a loss. Often the hero has to trade something to get something. Luke has to lose Obi-Wan Kenobi so that way he can take the next step of his journey. In fact, Obi-Wan has to sacrifice himself. Not only does Mando Din Djarin have to abandon the covert, he has to it's ultimately at the expense of the covert that he makes this decision to protect the child. And this is where the hero's journey then starts to move into culmination, which is the hero realizes, just as Frodo realizes, that the choices that they made are big enough that what they're doing is more important than their life. And that's where we get to the resolutions. Spoilers for the Mandalorian. As Mando is coming out of the world of chaos, one, he is no longer the loner, the man with no name. He is the pseudo parent of the child, and he is also named Din Djarin. And you learn about his history and the trauma that's happened to him, and of course why he could never betray a youngling who was in a similar position. And likewise, he builds a family with you know of course, Cara Dune and I don't know why I'm blanking on this. It's Carl Weathers, but of course I'm blanking on the name of Grimm. Of course I'm forgetting his name, but anyway, he builds a brand new family, and ultimately has that now, and he's not a man alone. And at the end of that first season, he has changed his creed, been true to himself, become the master of his new order, and also is now irrevocably changed, living not just for himself, but for others. And that is an amazing hero's journey.
I love it. And something very interesting happens at the end of the season. I forget the character's name. It's like the armorer. I forget not the blacksmith, but whoever plays that Mandalorian blacksmith who finally forges his full Beskar armor for him. At the very end, she says to him, and I'm paraphrasing, but she reinforces, because he has the child. He's like, a Jedi needs to get it. Someone needs to get this child. And she said, "You are now tasked with this." She doesn't provide the quest. She does not bestow. What's the word I'm looking? She does not bequeath the quest, I guess, upon him. He realizes that it's there. She reinforces objectively from an outsider's perspective, you are on a quest. This is your quest. This is the way. And reinforces that you know this, Din. I'm telling you, from our perspective, on the outsider's perspective, it is clear that you have now been what is the term I'm looking for? Guessed. You've been guessed a quest. This is your quest to complete. Nobody else can complete it. You cannot advance until you complete this quest. You can't take on any other quests until you complete this one. This is the thing you are now doing. And she says it in so few words of basically like this is what you need to do. This is the way.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. I love it. Yeah. It is one of my favorite hero journeys. It takes place, of course, over multiple episodes, but I always there's Dan Harmon has this crazy series that's called Harmon Quest, and of course he's the person that talks about the story circle. And there's a thing though that in this crazy show Harmon Quest, which is like hey Jeff, do you play Dungeons and Dragons by chance, or did you ever play that?
Okay, this is a longer conversation. The answer is no. No, I have never played it, and I want to learn. I desperately want to learn. When I was in high school, short story, at that middle school, high school, the idea amongst the people that I was around for the most part, it was just the thing to make fun of the people who play Dungeons and Dragons. So I didn't know anybody who did. I did play Magic though. Magic the Gathering was like my jam
Oh, right
for
on.
like the
Right
last
on.
3 years of high school. But I had this stigma in my head that no, you just don't do that. And now I look at it and I see people that it's not just I see the people that do play it, but I see what it is they're doing. And I see the crafting of your own story that then gets told by a dungeon master who controls this storyline for you, but you still get to weave your path in. I'm like, how have I never played this before? Like, this sounds magical. Like, how did I miss out on this when I was in high school?
I'm a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons. We should have the Dungeon Master visits the Kessel chat.
I love it.
Because and the reason why I bring it up is Dan Harmon, he's got his issues. Rich, this is the way. Dan Harmon's got his issues, but he's a really great storyteller, and he's brought Dungeons and Dragons to a lot of mainstream items through Community. There's 2 amazing episodes. The first, of course, is far superior, just on Dungeons and Dragons. It is a bottle episode, by the way, where you would watch characters act out Dungeons and Dragons, and to listen
awesome.
to well, they can't call it that, but to listen to or no, they do call it that. They're able to get away with it. They can't call it that in Harmon Quest. And to hear Chevy Chase say full control, that's also a really great example of the hero's quest that's taking place in that episode. But in Harmon Quest, it's a whole season of them playing a cultivated version of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's then animated. It's definitely not for kids, by the way. It's not a family show. But it ends with Spencer, who is their dungeon master, summarizing the end of the story. And the thing that he says is, and they walk away changed. And it is exactly what is the most important element of the hero's journey. Is, in essence, the person who they were dies, and they are reborn to be this new person who possesses all of this new wisdom, who possesses this knowledge. You could say it's magical knowledge, but it is something that they are now changed. They can't go back to the world that they were. They can only now they can now act and live in there, but they can't be the person that they were now. They are forever changed. And that's what I love about Star Wars and Din Djarin and Luke Skywalker and Rey. It's that part of the journey. Neo in the Matrix, it is that cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And it is in all cultures, all over, and it comes with that ability to know you are changed. So
I
yeah,
love that.
I love that.
I love that description, and I love that thing. There was actually it was a satirical TV show years ago, and I think it went through like one season. Maybe it was just on YouTube. I'll have to find the name, but it was basically these 4 or 5 people who played like a World of Warcraft or something, but they were like the typical like an orc, a wizard, or whatever else. And it was all these people that never met in person, but they all played the game. So think of like a cast from Community, but the TV show was them all playing this game, and they would flip. It would flip. Each scene would flip to that person talking. They were talking over chat about playing the game together, whatever else. And then one time they actually do meet in person. They're like, "Oh, this is kind of awkward. Why are we meeting in person? This is weird." It just reminded me. It was a while ago, but yeah, Din he really is that sort of quintessential like walking hero, kind of a walking dude. I actually the very first episode when we got finished with it, all I could think was Roland Deschain from the Dark Tower series.
Oh, yeah.
He was watching him walk, and then not just going about this thing and hitting these things he has to hit. He knows he has this overarching thing that is in his past that has happened. He's got a goal that's out there, but he doesn't really talk about it. It's a thing for him, but he's got stuff in front of him to get through his regular trudgery every single day to get to this thing that he thinks he's going towards. And it just reminded me so much of the Dark Tower series and Roland's struggle and what he's always trying to get to until he finally does. And like, we pick up with him having this quest, but we don't really understand what that quest is until after he finishes talking to the Man in Black. And when he finally finishes talking to that, has that palaver and ends up on the beach, and now he knows what his quest is, and he really begins the journey of that process. I think that felt very, very akin or Din's journey felt very akin to me of that story, because there's some sort of thing that happens, the revelation. I mean, it is literally a template. The hero's journey, you could like the overhead projector, and you lay the transparency on top that's got the print auto, and it just lays on top of the next thing. Like, it reminds me of that a lot. That's really cool, dude. That
Yeah.
Din is fantastic. That is awesome.
Yeah, but I have like, by the way, thank you to Jeff and to everybody for letting me wax on and on and on about this. Because I apologize. I love this topic. I am a big fan of it. Jeff, I know you have selected someone though.
I do. I
On
did.
your side.
I did,
Yeah.
and I wore the High Republic shirt in honor of it. So I decided, I spent a lot of time throughout the day. I couldn't find a person throughout the day in Legends, Old Republic, doesn't matter the era, Skywalker era, that I was like, this person just clicks for me, because everybody I thought of was like, well, that's a person everyone is going to think about. Who would this be? Who I feel passionate about. And so I'm like, wait a second. There's the High Republic. There's no reason not to pick somebody here, even if that person's journey is not completed yet. What it got me thinking is that a character or a person has to be on a journey, and there will be a sort of a conclusion to that journey, but that doesn't have to mean the conclusion of their life. That's just the conclusion of that particular journey, and then a new journey starts in many cases. And so I thought it might be interesting to talk about a particular character from one of the Star Wars comics, the High Republic comics. This is the High Republic. There's two lines. There's Star Wars: The High Republic, and then there's the High Republic Adventures. So this is just the High Republic. It's the first one that released day one of the new High Republic era books and everything. And this is issue number 1. There are 3 characters on this, and I'll get to the main character I'm going to talk about is here right in the middle. Her master is Skier, the Trandoshan. One of the only times a Trandoshan has ever been a Jedi Master in this case, and one of the most well-known Jedi Masters. This is Avar Kriss. She is you can see it right here. She is basically like the admiral or the keeper of Starlight Beacon, which is one of the great works, referred to as the great works by the current chancellor of the High Republic. And she's trying to bring the galaxy together. Most of the Outer Rim has never been touched. Most of the galaxy has never been touched or even mapped. They're still working on that. So the galactic the chancellor has created these great works projects to bring people together. So she created this thing called Starlight Beacon, which is like a beacon of hope for people in the Outer Rim to always know that the Jedi are there to help. That's how this whole thing opens up. So all the books that release are all happening at the exact same time. The comics, the print books, everything. All their stories are happening in parallel with each other. We're just seeing from different people's perspective. But here in the middle, this is Keiv Trenis. So she's a brand new character, and she's amazing. She is a Padawan in the story. I won't go through the comic, but it's beautiful. Skier is teaching her kind of final lessons, but she doesn't realize her final lessons before she gets knighted to become a Jedi Knight. But what's interesting to me about her is that what we pick up on is she's a Padawan. She's about ready to be knighted. She doesn't know that, but she's very near taking the trials. Where's the plastic sleeve? It is right here, Rich. I had to take it out of the board of the sleeve so I could show it to you.
Hey, dude, that's legit right there. Like, anybody who's watching that stuff, like, you gotta take care of your books.
Oh, they're here. Know? Yeah, we're good. It's taped. It's good.
That's awesome.
Very gently. It's not even, my laptop for work is laying right here. It's laying next to my laptop, so the venting is going the other way, so heat's not even on it. I don't want the coloring ink to get discolored. No, we're good.
Yeah,
I promise,
man,
Rich.
That's
we're
legit
good,
right there.
You're up about here. Let's bring it to about here. But the reason I picked her is because it's a character that we are only just getting to know. We are only meeting her at the end of her apprenticeship, where she doesn't know it yet, but she's about to become a knight. But she's at the end of her apprenticeship, and her master are super, super close. He tests her in ways that she could never imagine being tested. And the first thought I had when I read this is like, her master's a Trandoshan. They're not known for mild and calm tempers. They're known for being hunters and killers. They're the heroes of their own world, but the rest of the galaxy doesn't see them that way. And so he is one of the most well-known Jedi Masters because he is Trandoshan, one of the only ones who's ever happened. And he has controlled the inner sort of like wildness of the Trandoshan species and centered himself so he can be a really well-known Jedi Master, which is amazing to me. And so she has learned, as a human, has learned from him and been able to learn from the struggle that he deals with and his own nature as his particular species, and learn from that. But we're only seeing it at this point. And so one, I want to know what got her to this place. So the big first half of the first hemisphere of the hero's journey, that circle, we still want to know about that. We haven't learned about that yet, but we're going to. That means there's all kinds of stories that will be involved in getting her to the place she's at now. But then in these stories, not to be too much of a spoiler, but in these stories, what we learned is that we pick up at a place in this book, which happens, this comic, right after a book I have behind me called Into the Light, which was written by Charles Soule, which is the first book that released of the High Republic. And in that, the Jedi come to help in this big calamity that occurs. And in this thing that they're helping with, Skier loses one of his arms. Now he's Trandoshan, he's a lizard. His arm will grow back over time. But he does lose it, and in losing it, it has made him feel lessened a bit in the Force, even though he's doesn't want to process it out loud. It does make him feel lessened because there's the cosmic Force and what is the other Force called? There's the cosmic and I forget
living
the other
Force?
The living Force. And so he is still connected to the cosmic Force, as all beings are, but he feels diminished in his connection to the living Force because a part of him is now gone. And we don't learn this right away, but he's sort of fighting this, and his Padawan is trying to help. She feels like she's trying to engage with him and talk with him, but he basically is like, no, Padawan, I'm here to teach you. Don't worry about me. And we already start to see a flaw happen there, where the best mentorships and teaching relationships happen when each person can be open and honest with each other. And we already start to see that pretty quickly, where she's concerned with him, so her attention's stretched a little bit from what she should be doing, quote, should be doing in front of her, to this other thing with her master. But what that does, though, is it does open her up to the other things happening in the world around her, which sets the story for what happens with her. And so shortly thereafter, a situation occurs and she gets knighted, and then we meet one of the newest evil characters in the story of the High Republic, called the Drangir, which are these sentient plants that they think of all other living creatures as simply meat. They don't even, you talk to them and they're like, are you saying something? They hear you as like cattle. They're completely fed off of the dark side of the Force. They don't use the Force, but they're basically like in and of themselves as a sentient race, almost like a Force nexus as a race, which makes them really hard for the Jedi to deal with, because they're almost emanating dark side all of the time, which confuses their senses and makes it really hard for the Jedi to be around and focus. So it's interesting because Avar, Chris, right here, not to get down to her path too far, but there's the Jedi in this era. They connect with the Force a lot differently than the Jedi we're used to hearing, in that Avar hears the Force, or she feels the Force by hearing music. And so every being that is connected to the Force, she hears them in the Force. She actually hears them as music in the Force. So there's actually a human condition where people hear music as a color. There's a few musicians. Pharrell has talked about having this, and then Maggie Rogers has talked about this too, where she hears certain types of music as colors. So they use that type of human condition for Avar and many of the other Jedi. And so Keiv is not that way, but she understands that others are, and she's trying to figure out how to understand that. And in the meantime, they meet this. She gets her knighthood, and then her master's having problems because he seems more disconnected because he's lost his arm. And then they meet the Drangir, and then the Hutts come involved, and it becomes, all this stuff happens to her like super, super fast. And at this time period, the Jedi have lightsabers, but they don't fight Sith. Like, Sith are not a thing in this time period for the Jedi. So fighting in that way is just not as common as what we think. It's different types of activities they get involved with. And so you watch her not just evolve into this Jedi Knight, but very quickly have to sort of become the caretaker for her master, because her master actually gets infected by the Drangir unintentionally. They like creep into his body and start to take over his mind, and he's fighting them because he can do that, but only to a point. And they can now control him and use his Force abilities. And so she has to kind of now play the master, trying to help him and get him, like, remember your training, master, remember your training, think about this. So like within the series span of like 3 or 4 issues, we've already seen her have to immediately jump into, I have to use these lessons I've been learning right now. Practical applications, go. And it's fascinating for me because in a book, and by book I mean a print book, a hardcover or softback or paperback book, an author would spend a lot of time going through the the dialogue and the mental conversations that are happening to really set up
Mhm.
a scene, half a page or more to set something up. Whereas in a TV show or movie, you wouldn't hear that. It would have to happen in a second and move on. So a book,
Yeah.
you can do that, and you have to do that in a book to get someone to
Yep.
the next place to really understand all the nuance in that situation. What's interesting and fascinating to me now that I've kind of really gotten back into comic style print or a reading is they do that so well in the way the tiles or the slides are set up on the pages, the artwork,
Mhm.
how the artwork is built, and then how the stories are written in a more condensed version than a print book would be, or that style of
Mhm.
print
Mhm.
book,
Mhm.
but not as condensed as a TV show or a whatever else, where they would like ignore dialogue completely and have an action scene instead in place sometimes of dialogue to convey the same sort of message. And I love this about these books because you're actually still getting so much of that same story that I would get out of a 500-page book in 15,
Oh
20
yeah.
pages, and the same emotion, the same feelings, the same impact, and you'll feel you empathize so much with her character in just 3 comic books issues that it blows my mind. It like makes me really want to learn. Fun fact, I actually tried to, when I cut my son's hair here recently, I actually tried to give him a similar haircut to what she has, where like half his head was shaved and the other half, because I'm like, she just had that, her character had that kind of an impact on me. I'm like, my son would look awesome with that. I'm totally going to do
Oh,
that with
that's
my son. I'm
awesome.
like, but it made me think, I'm like, wow, her character and the way that Kevin Scott wrote her character and the dialogue in the book, these books,
Mhm.
just really makes me think, not only do I love how she's already impacting people, and we're already seeing her have to deal with this sort of like, here's this conflict you have to deal with, and you have to do all these other things with it. But what happened before this? How'd you even get here? And what's going to happen next? We just don't know yet. And I found that super fascinating and really just intriguing about all of these stories.
That's awesome. I mean, I like this idea too of I love your selection of just a character who is in the midst of their journey. And again, I think that you're hitting on two things that I think are critically important to a hero's journey, which is because there's two paths. You have the Luke path, which is the classic hero's journey, which is often involving them recognizing that a viewpoint that they had at the beginning of the story was a flaw and that they have to overcome that. And then the tragic hero's path is one where the hero has a fatal flaw that they keep let growing and growing and growing until it consumes them. And for Luke, the fatal flaw is, my life would be so great if I could just get off of this dirt farm. And he's right, but he's also wrong
Mm-hmm.
because he doesn't realize what's going to happen, and it's why he's sitting in the Falcon after Obi-Wan dies and realizes what he's lost. Or even when he's on Tatooine in Return of the Jedi, and he says, I was born here, like he's so much older now, and he's got so much perspective now.
Mm-hmm.
Anakin does the opposite, and it's kind of like what's happening in the story you're talking about, where you have a mentor figure who has a flaw and they're missing it, and that blind spot can lead to tragedy. And you've got a young apprentice who is becoming more heroic, and they're able to overcome their flaws while also righting a
Mm-hmm.
trauma. That is like that's it's the slicing of the Gordian knot. It's fixing the wrong of the past that the hero is connected to, and is odd, and not the cause of, sometimes, but not the cause of, but the antidote for it.
Mm-hmm.
They are the panacea. And
Yes.
so that's where it's like, I can't wait to see where this character will develop.
She is one of many in these new stories that I'm absolutely loving. It was a great one. It was one that, and thank you. Like, it was one that I really was excited to pick because of all the other characters we've already started learning about in these new books, the comics included. She is almost the center point. The other book, there really isn't a center figure. There is, but there isn't. There's almost multiple centers of all the other books. Even when there is a single person, they're usually wrapped around 2 or 3 in a couple of the other books that we have so far. And in this comic, she's actually a pretty clear, to me, sort of hero of the story, because It's not the classic hero. It's not the person who is standing out above the rest. It's the person who's standing out because in the situation, that's what it's called for, and it is necessary. So the person does it, and they don't necessarily believe that they can do it, but they're put in a situation that they need to do it anyway, and they do. And they'll walk away feeling a little hurt, a little beat up, feeling kind of okay, a little, a little bit of an endorphin rush. And then when they look back, will realize, oh, wow, that's what I just came out of. I just walked to I just walked through the cave on Dagobah and I came out the other side. Oh, wait, that did actually just happen. Oh, interesting. You did get to have, yeah, exactly. You almost did get to have a cup of coffee at the restaurant at the end of the universe and just watch it happen for a minute and then get to step back into the real world for a minute. There's my Douglas Adams there for a minute.
Oh, no, that was awesome. That was awesome. Right when you brought that up, I knew exactly what that was. But yeah, and I by the way totally agree with you on like the advantages or the unique wins that you get when you're reading comic books or any type of graphic novel. And how those stories, it's not just the people that are writing the words and the bubbles or writing the stories. It's also the artists, the illustrators, the people that are inking the pages, that they really help to really craft that story, because when done properly, panels will evoke the same type of emotion that you would see in a movie, but they have the benefit of having narration that would get in the way of a movie, but is natural in a book that you're reading. And so it's a form of visual storytelling that blends what I think are two of my favorite mediums, which is, of course, I love reading books. I love reading novels. It's where my education is from. And then of course I just like dig into movies. Like I can do this all day. But Captain America. So I will say that there's a great marriage of that in really great comic books, whether it is these new High Republic series, the comic books that we've talked about on the Star Wars side, or even some of the great classics. And when I mean classics, they are recent, but things like V for Vendetta, even a little V for Vendetta, anything like the Jodorowsky comic books that have come out, which are insane, but are amazing, and the inspiration behind some of my favorite movies, like The Fifth Element. By the way, a big plug right here for the Inkle. If you've never read it, it's like unbelievable, and it is the source material that makes The Fifth Element possible. But yeah, or even things like Darren Aronofsky, who's a relatively well-known director, directed movies like Pi or Requiem for a Dream, Mother. He made a movie called The Fountain. And it's a very kind of science fiction-y movie. It blends history, science fiction. It's also a hero's journey, by the way. And a story about birth, death, rebirth, death again, the kind of endless part of that story. And he couldn't make it as a movie. He was originally going to have the movie that he made has Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz in it, but at the time he was going to make a movie, he was going to have Brad Pitt and Kate Blanchett in it. Couldn't make the movie, so he turned it into a comic book, which for a while was really popular, taking stories that couldn't be made into movies and then turning them into comic books. Idea. And it is one of my favorite comic books. It's The Fountain. It's hard to find, but it's just like what you're saying, which really helps to tell these stories in a visual narrative format. But it's not such a, and I mean this in its literal sense, dominating narrative that you get out of a movie. It allows a lot more interpretation. Like you can see you're painting the motions between the panels. You're making judgments on the emotion that's happening in that scene rather than an actor telling you it. So it's I could not agree more. I love the pick, but I love that it's from a comic book.
Yeah, I actually bought a hardback version, a reprint of, I think it's the first like 8 volumes of Neil Gaiman's Sandman from the early 90s. I have it on my nightstand. It's one of my books to read here soon. And I know there's another volume that is like the remaining parts of the series that were printed that I need to find at some point. But that they're actually turning that into a Netflix series. So they've started either recording, and in this case, I learned this recently that he was given high levels of creative control. He's
Oh, that's
part of the
awesome.
writing process and helping to create it and put it to life. But I love that because it's kind of not the opposite, but the inverse of what we were talking about a second ago, taking these stories that could be a TV show or movie. My wife and I talk about this all the time. Like, let's stop making so many of these big movies and make more series or make more
Yeah.
comics, because there's so much more that can be done with those other types of storytelling or mediums of delivering a story. And I think comics have in the like broader society in the States at least, but probably more globally, people, they're not as accepted, as they're thought of more as like the geek culture, as opposed to this is just another way to convey a story. It's another medium for delivering a story. I feel like more people would
Oh,
actually
yeah.
like finding a good beer. Like, I'm a huge craft beer fan. Like, finding a good style of beer that you actually like. People are like, oh, I don't like beer. Well, there's like 150 different styles of beer. Like, what do you mean you don't like beer? Let's say saying like you may not be able to drink it, like you don't enjoy it, that's fine, but there's 150 different styles. You can't just say unless you've had something from all of those, you can't say you don't like it. Like, you don't like the
Yeah.
ones you've had, that's fine. Like, no one's gonna fault you for that. But it's like saying I don't like driving cars. Why? Well, I own a Honda and I don't care for that. Like,
Yeah.
it's you're extrapolating too much. It doesn't work. I
Yeah.
think the same goes for comics. So, like, I wouldn't like to read a Captain America comic. Okay, then
Mhm.
don't read a Captain America comic. There's a lot of other comics out there, or graphic novels and styles, that you probably would find really enjoyable as a story that you want to read. So, like, I would love to see more people be willing or open to reading comics or graphic novels of various types, because there's so much that is actually published that way that are not the superhero adventures that you being, the air quotes, hear about.
Mhm.
Yes, that exists, but Sandman is a good example. The ones you mentioned, The Fountain, are a really good example, where they're not your classic superheroes. It's a different type of. It's just another story that happens to use this medium to be delivered in, and I think that's really amazing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I'd like to see more of that style of storytelling. Before we went, there was one other. I actually watched the first episode of Loki last night, and it
Oh,
really.
I haven't seen it.
No
As
spoilers.
people know, I'm big with the binge, where I've got to like have a couple of episodes and then
Yeah,
I just
I
down
want
them all
no
at the
details.
same time.
No details. I won't tell any details. Only to say that it is very interesting. This very much allows, even in the first episode, allows for
Mhm.
some exposure to sort of the hero or the anti-hero's journey. When you get to the conclusion of the first episode, many people will see it very differently than me, and that's fine. But a lot that I took away from it was very, wow, we have not been able to learn these sorts of things about Loki. I really love this character. Like, I want to watch this show. It made me feel that, because the way that he gets his character is pulled, doesn't want to be, he's pulled kicking and screaming through some exposure of who he is, the type of person that he is, that by the time you get to the end, he's still him, but now you understand a lot more about who he is and his motivations, or at least enough in this first episode to be like, all right, you're a real character. You got you're doing a little something there that's not awesome, but there is actually a reason behind it. There are a number of reasons behind it that, as an audience member, I'm like, I can connect with those reasons. I don't agree with how you go about them, but I get it. Like, I do understand. I can empathize with how you got to this point.
Yeah, see, I think we're ending here the episode on a really good point, because that is where everything that you're saying about, like, when people want to make judgments on things that are, oh, well, I don't like that comic book, or I don't like this, or I don't like that music. I had a great professor once talk about the importance of experiencing art, even if you don't like it, because it's art and it's great for you to have a, a reaction to it. That's why it's being created. It's being created to be consumed.
Mm-hmm.
And for you to say, I don't like this, it's like if you eat a cake and you're like, hey, you know what? This isn't what I like, but I'm glad I tried it. And just like with the Loki story, I'm sure that there are people that are like, oh, that's a comic book story, I don't know if I want to get into that, like, I don't know if it's accessible to me. And that's kind of the heart of everything that we've been talking about tonight, because that anti-hero story, which exists in the hero journey,
Mm-hmm.
that we're seeing Loki go through, is one that all of us get to participate in. And if you are watching that and thinking, well, I don't know if this is for me, there are stories that you already love, that is the cycle of that story, and this is just a different interpretation, but it's one that you engage with, that makes an impact on you, that you get to have a feeling on, that you get
Mm-hmm.
to experience it and make a reaction. And just like our heroes that we've been talking about today, who walk away from these stories after walk away at the end of their story in an irrevocably different state that they started, all of us are then changed by experiencing that.
Absolutely.
So
100%.
it's your own private hero story. It's all for you.
It is. So we're gonna wrap up. I don't want to be like the final thought here necessarily, but because what you just said was probably the best way to wrap up this show. But you got me thinking about something when you mentioned music.
Go for it.
Because I am not, I have not thought of myself ever as somebody who likes country music. I just generally am like, I don't like country music. I've come to love many more other styles of music than I ever did before, or really enjoy and get enjoyment out of. But country's one it bothered me for some reason.
Jeff, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just going to let you know I come from a place where we had both kinds of music, country and Western. So, yeah.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Well, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, country and Western. That's us.
But I realized recently that as I was, that there, again, country, the term country or country Western refers to so many subversions of that or derivatives. I mean, I love bluegrass. I will listen to bluegrass all day, then some, bluegrass all day today, and then some Irish music, Irish rock and punk tomorrow, and then whatever else the next day. And it just made me realize, I need to stop making a generalization because it's not true. There are parts of it that I am not a fan of, but a lot of it I love. And I don't think you'd call her country, but sort of folk style is like Maggie Rogers. I'd mentioned her here.
Oh, yeah.
And my wife turned me on to her. I'm like, oh my God, she's amazing. And so what it made me realize, and I heard this quote, I've heard this quote kind of said in two different ways by two different people, but it's basically the same. One of them was Priya Parker, who wrote a book called, looking here, The Art of Gathering, How We Meet and Why It Matters. And one of the rules she says when it comes to a gathering is the gathering needs to be disputable. And doesn't mean that she doesn't mean that you need to let people tell you how to do it differently, but people need to have an opinion about it. They need to just be able to feel like, and what she actually said after that was, if people don't have an emotion about it, love or hate, strong or positive or negative, you're not doing anything. And the other person I heard this said a little bit more succinctly than that podcast, version of it was Tinker Hatfield, who retired now, but he used to be the chief designer for Nike for years. He basically made the Air Jordans what the Air Jordan is now. Not basically, he literally made Air Jordan what the Air Jordan is now. And if you get a chance to watch on Netflix the show called Abstract, there's an episode interviews. There's a mini documentary on Tinker Hatfield. It's amazing. But he says at the very end of it, and this is the same thing she says, I think he probably got it from her, is if people don't either love or hate what you do, you just really haven't done anything at all. And I think that it goes to music, it goes to the stories we're talking about that people write, mediums of comics, everything. That if people don't feel one way, like strong, positive or negative, or a strong emotion about the thing that you have done, you really haven't done much of anything at all. Because if they don't feel an emotion about it, then you haven't made any sort of impact. You're just there. And I love that because it really makes you think, did someone tell me, oh, dude, what you did sucked? Maybe you think that. Okay, but you're feeling something about what I just did, or this book, or what have you. Or, I loved it. Well, that's awesome too. But both are awesome. It means someone took something away from it, made them think about something. Whether you like the outcome doesn't matter. You made them think, or the medium or the content, the story made them feel a way. Gave them a set of feels. But if they walk away going, okay, I read a thing.
Yeah, there's a poem that is said in the most recent season of The Crown, which I could also make this the Crown chat, Jeff. I'm not joking around. If we want, we can get deep into The Crown.
I'm gonna have to pass on that one. Sorry, I'm gonna draw the line someplace.
Seriously, man. Like I'm a consumer of all art, but my background in English literature kind of blends over to that. So I apologize to the Star Wars community listening to this right now.
I did read Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monster, so does that count? I mean,
Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I have a copy of it legit right over there.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, the thing that I but I can go on and on about the birth of the British novel. The real truth though that I wanted to bring up is that there's a moment in that show where someone says, oh, I just want to be friends with everybody and kind of like have this kind of middle area, and the response is, well, then you have not been successful in life, you. And then it's this great quote from a poem of whom I'm forgetting the author, but it's you have made no enemies, you have dashed no cup from liar's lips. It's like it's important that in life you have your fans and you have your critics, because it means that you're making choices. And in all art, which, circling back to the start of the show about all art being political, it's so important to make choices, and those choices by their nature are political. And as long as you're going to stand by them and say, this is what I want to say, this is the truth that I'm putting out there, then yeah, it's great. You're going to ruffle some feathers. You're going to get some fans and some fanboys and praise. But you should never aim for the middle of the road. I had an amazing editor once tell me, Ryan, you need to pick a side, because the only thing in the middle of the road are yellow lines and armadillos. So what do you want to be? And
That's awesome.
And so I think that's why it's so important for artists to say, this is the thing that I want to say, and to start with that and have that run through your art, whether it's Star Wars or a comic book or anything.
And that, I think, is the end of our show right there. That is
right on.
It doesn't get any better than that. Rich, if you're still around, man, I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. And for everybody else who's watching later on, thank you so much. Hope you liked the show. Leave us a comment below. Tell us what you thought. Tell us your heroes and who you'd like to talk about. Hit subscribe. It helps. And the little thumbs up, because it actually does bump the channel up a little bit. Ryan, it's been awesome, dude. Thanks for being here.
Oh, Jeff, always awesome.
Cool.
Always awesome. Thank you so much.
Everyone have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, bye, everybody.